be better if I was talking off of mute. That would be 2000% better. How are we doing? How are we doing on this wonderful day? This day, this taping, Cinco de Mayo. For some people, Cinco de Mayo. Some people, Revenge of the Fifth. And so, as a Star Wars fan, I start to recognize how, that was my very first movie that I ever saw in my life in 1977. Yes, I'm dating myself. And so I've always been a Star Wars fan. So I know Miss Johnson has no inkling of what the heck I'm talking about. But, you know, as a technology fan herself, maybe she can express to me, what did you grow up on? Did you grow up on Star Trek or anything like that, Miss Johnson? Just for inquiring minds. Just inquiring minds.
To a degree, Star Trek, Next Generation. I'm a fan of Picard, but
Okay.
coming from a Caribbean household, a lot of Westerns in the 18. That was this.
I understand. I understand. I get it. I get it. I get it. And once again, we're about to get into another topic as a part of the Dynasty Path. We're getting into wills and trusts. Yeah, we're going to be in wills and trusts for the next couple of weeks because, we don't just run through things in a quick fashion. And once again, I always give props to the team because the feedback and the clarity always assists with how we're doing certain things. Mr. Sampson said Flash Gordon. He's going back to the 80s. Jesus Christ. I remember that movie too. Flash Gordon. I remember the cartoon. I'm not even talking about the movie. I remember the cartoon. My God. That's like, no, Flash Gordon was Saturdays.
No, Flash Gordon was 70s, Doc. That was black and white.
70s, yeah. That's what I'm sitting here.
With the rocket with the string on it and the sparkler in the back of the rocket.
Way before special effects with special effects. You sit there and be like, now we see the string. We see the string. Why are you dangling that thing like that? We dangling. Love Flash Gordon. It was in color though. Yeah, but still. Oh my God. She said it was in color. Now we're reminiscing. Well, where are these gas prices are, we would love to go back to those. I would like to even go back to, like when I was still a young whippersnapper during even the oil embargo. And the prices were probably still cheaper than what we're circulating right now. And so, we're very mindful about what is happening geopolitically. And even though they claim that, epic fury has ended, but we're still in the space where time is saving. People are, well, in the New York area, people are dealing with $4.50 a gallon. And we're not even going to talk about premium. We're talking about regular. We're not talking about premium. Some of us got that we can put nothing but premium in our car. So I know what it costs to put gas in my vehicle, and it is a sticker shock. And you start making respective choices. You start recognizing, you start doubling up and tripling up on trips and be like, okay, if I'm going in this particular direction, I'm going to make sure I'm doing 2 or 3 errands. So if I'm doing this gas run or if I'm doing something to do something, just to make sure. So we're very, very mindful of that. And as Dr. Cheryl Clarke comes in, if I ask her, because I don't know, in her household, she wasn't really a sci-fi fan. I don't know if they really watched sci-fi. They was probably more into the Christines and the Claudines and stuff like that. So let's find out if Dr. Cheryl Clarke has any reminisce, or does she remember any sci-fi shows she remembers growing up? Because we've already had Star Trek, Star Wars, and Flash Gordon. So let's hear what Dr. Cheryl is going to say that she may have been experienced as she was, growing up as a whippersnapper.
Yes, my mother with the Star Trek. That's why I don't like it today.
Oh God, the original. You don't like Spock and the Spock?
Oh,
Spock.
I now Twilight Zone I could get down with.
Oh, that's something that's in our house every night. She watches
Twilight Zone. That's my jam. But my mother with that Star Trek, that was her thing.
Oh, Miss Karen Clarke is in the building. Let me find out from my sister. What shows that she liked. Was she into any sci-fi?
Sci-fi, definitely not.
No sci-fi? No
Mm,
Flash Gordon? Oh, don't tell me you was into the westerns.
no,
What
I
what 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 type of movies were you into then?
like rom-coms. I want
Oh,
to laugh, and
oh,
it
okay,
can be anything too intense. No.
okay, okay, okay. That's good to know. That's good to know. So okay, so Miss Karen was not definitely the rom com. She's into her rom coms. So that means she's into those notebooks. Uh, or I wouldn't be surprised. They probably got Lifetime on repeat in her household. Probably got the Lifetime movie channel. Because I remember there was a time when Dr. Cheryl one time was watching Lifetime movie channel. All of a sudden, you get caught up in some of those movies. Like, wait a minute, why am I sitting here watching this? You get caught up in some of those storylines. So that's interesting. So I see Mr. Franklin is in the building. Mr. Franklin, did you watch any sci-fi films growing up? Anything like that? Or what was your like go-to?
Star Trek.
Oh, okay, good. So you was hanging out with Dr. Cheryl. So that means you were a Trekkie. You like Spock in them and James T. Kirk. Okay, that's good. That's good. I love me some Star Trek. I love me some Star Trek. Star Trek was good. But we're just reminiscing as we're recognizing as everyone's going through these particular economic situations and habitations, but we're also recognizing that wills and trusts are not just for the rich. And so, as we're about to get into this respective teaching, if you miss any of the previous, like we just completed the cycle of dealing with the identity and how that imposter syndrome can sometimes rear its ugly head because our brains are meaning making machines. You can always catch up on my YouTube channel for those respective episodes. Remember, everything that we share here in the Comeback Collective Circle is about empowering and being an application, not for us just to look at certain things without applying it. It's about being an application. So without further ado, we won't belabor long. We're going to jump into this thing. It's starting to get a little bit better with some of the stuff. Okay, what's going on here? Oh, I was about to say, where is my? There we go. And I always ask, let's see, what is more? Let's see, hide that. Okay, because we started to cook better with gas. Okay, no, that's set up. No, forgetting. There we go. So, Miss Johnson, do we see anything? No bars, no boxes, nothing.
We are perfectly clear.
Come on, we're finally cooking with some real gas. I love it. I love it. I love it. And in this first part, as we deal with wills and trusts, we deal with the legacy planning and implementation, building wealth that outlives you. And the reason why that is so important is sometimes we ultimately forget that we came into this world naked and we're going to leave out of here, even if we're in a casket, but somehow we're going to still end up naked. You're going to still be naked. So you can't take it with you. So what is it that you're doing during this time frame? What are you doing with that dash that allows you to leave something that you're, as I say, from a spiritual, biblical sense, that you're taking care of your children's children? And so here in the Comeback Collective Circle, we're going to be dealing with in this first part about structure, stewardship, and succession. And that's so important because if you don't have the necessary structures in space and in step, then you're really not stewarding anything properly. And then if you're not stewarding anything properly, it's hard to do, the succession plan. And I remember the HBO show, which I loved. It was a very good show. The Succession was on HBO. And for some of you, well, they don't give us no advertising dollars. So if you decide to check out that show, you'll check it out. But it's all about how people are positioning themselves in a particular plan within a family dynamic in an affluent family. And when you start to recognize that we're all have some aspect of affluence, even if the dollars may not necessarily be there, because you'll be surprised, depending upon the choices that you make and the decisions that you make, you can start at one small space and then end up getting into a greater space. And so that is what we're going to be talking about here on this fine day here today. Okay, no, not the highlight. Okay, there we go. There we go. Now we're going to deal with the foundational aspect What is legacy planning? That is what we're really talking about today when we talk about wills and trusts. It's all about legacy planning. And now I'm going to ask Ms. Johnson if you can read that first paragraph for us.
Legacy planning is the deliberate, strategic process of organizing your assets, obligations, and key decisions so that everything that you built transfers smoothly, whether due to death or incapacitation. It is not a single document or a one-time conversation. It is a living framework that protects the people and causes you care about most.
Yeah, because even when you think about it, you hear like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett who've made their thoughts known and established their trust to be known that, I know with Bill Gates, he's already committed like 90% of his wealth. It's going to go to different foundations, different causes when he transitions. And I think Warren Buffett's around that same number or close to 95%. He's barely leaving anything for like his family members and stuff like that. But even that 5% is a tremendous amount of wealth. And so when you start to recognize legacy plan is not just about what you're leaving, but sometimes what you're creating as a standard that other people can remember your name. And so the reason why it's a living framework, because sometimes we make the assumption, or we could be moving in the assumption that, creating a will is just a one-time thing and that's it. No, a will at times needs to be revisited. And we're going to get into that a little bit further on. Or having a conversation about a trust. What's a trust? Why would I get a trust? And you'll be surprised how the wealthy and the affluent keep their money in their family. And, the worst case scenario is, you've accumulated some things and you may have done very well for yourself during your dash. And then all of a sudden, when it's time for you to transfer those assets over or to move some of those resources over, all of a sudden you're leaving your respective kinfolk with a bunch of bills. And that doesn't work. So I'm gonna ask Dr. Cheryl. Dr. Cheryl, you can read the box of assets and what's considered assets.
Real estate, investments, business interests, and personal property organized for intentional transfer.
See, those are your assets. Anything that is something that you can touch, even an asset could be your intellectual property. So we deal with a lot of realms of technology these days, your IP. Maybe you have created books. Maybe you've created art. Maybe you've created music. Those are assets. I mean, I know from when me and my family just experienced going to see the Michael Jackson movie as a family, we started to recognize, by him having certain conversations that some of the other artists didn't realize what he was doing. He was pulling the information from them and he started to implement that. And when he turned around, there was a time frame, but by the time Michael transitioned, you might as well say he owned about maybe 30 or 40% of Sony Records, based upon all the publishing that he owned, his own stuff, masters, and even to this very day, they talk about, his estate still makes probably close to $100 million a year. And he's transitioned since 2009. So all of those assets and all that controllability can create a sustainability that's wonderful. And I'll read the middle one, obligations. Your debts, your responsibilities and commitments accounted for so they don't become a burden to your survivors. And that becomes another thing. And I'll probably ask Mr. Sampson to jump in because since, that's our Jay-Z of the funeral homes and he deals with insurance from that aspect. And, there are times where people could be left with certain obligations like, wait a minute, this wasn't their obligation. But depending upon how certain things were commingled, all of a sudden you're inheriting someone's debt. You're inheriting someone's responsibility because they didn't take care of certain obligations that could have been taken care of if everything was properly planned. What would you say to that, Mr. Sampson?
Yes, Dr. Clarke, you're absolutely correct. Unfortunately, that is a sad reality that after you have to deal with the loss of someone that you may have loved dearly, then you got to go through the trauma of the inheritance taxes and the transfer of assets as well as the loss of assets. And then you have to be advised on how to navigate through what you are actually responsible for and what you're not responsible for, even though certain entities will try and tell you that you are. So that's why you definitely need wise counsel for after the death, because there's so much that people go through beyond, the person's passing. So yes, you are absolutely correct.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And that's so important because, we think just because we transition that, you can leave assets and you can also be leaving someone your debt. And that's why, especially if you were privy a little bit earlier in the year when we were delving into the respective different insurances, and, we're not telling you which ones to actually get. And we dealt with term, we dealt with universal life, we dealt with whole life, we dealt with that very intently because we started to bring the conversation about insurance to the forefront. Is not something that you talk about because you're wishing someone to transition or to expire. No, insurance is there not only for the living, but it's also there to take care of those who are deceased. And if you use it appropriately and properly, you start to recognize that things are being established because you're recognizing the continuity and decisions. Who manages, who inherits, and who speaks for you when you no longer can. That is so important because you recognize that an executor, you can recognize someone who is responsible, or the trustee who is the lead trustee. Those individuals are very important. And some of this documentation, if you don't have the right people established or that plan is deliberately, mapped out, you could be leaving a mess. And we've heard some of those horror stories. One thing we can say, Quincy Jones didn't leave a horror story. It was kind of sad that, some of his family members still decided to sell some of the stuff that they left him. Because the way how he structured his assets, he left them close to $500 million worth of things. And then, of course, his catalog was long and widespread over the 50 or 60 years that he was, creating music. And, they, as a family, they decided to, either sell some of it or from a publishing standpoint or whatever. But it just lets you know that if your stuff is structured properly, and it's always good to look at people who did it correctly, because that means you have a framework. You're not going in there blind. You're not going in there making assumptions, or I'm just going to figure it out. No, that doesn't make any sense. Just the same way that we have a lineage, that means you have the ability to go ask someone, especially if they have the experience and the knowledge. Well, how did you do this? And if you're wise, not only will you glean from them, but you'll use what you have and mix that information together to produce a result in your present. And so the core insight about this foundation deals with the fact that legacy is not what happens after you're gone. See, we got to get that out of your mind. The legacy only is happening, after I transition, I died, and now they talk about, no, your legacy starts now in your present. You are your legacy. You are your choices. You are your decisions. You are what it is that you're crafting, so that as we move on, it is what you deliberately plan while you're here. You're here in the here and now. We're not worrying about over yonder, going up to yonder. You're focused on the here and now. You're focused on your decision making. You're focused on your choices. You're focusing on how that even in this particular geopolitical standpoint that we're going through in this season, every single person is being impacted. You're hearing almost every day businesses announcing, okay, we're going to lay off 10%, 5%, 20%. You're talking about these are big companies. These are big situations that's happening. And part of it is technology, and part of it is like just a reframing of what's happening. And even though I usually don't like to talk about him, but we do, because this is partially his doing, for all those individuals who decided for the individual to be the 47th president, who told you that he was great in business. How do you look now? He was supposed to lower taxes. He was going to lower this, and groceries was going to lower on day one, and he wasn't going to get into any new wars. And then even today, we found out, Congress is trying to throw $1 billion towards some ballroom that was never needed. But allegedly, the taxpayers were never going to have to put a dime towards it. A lot of times you sit there and just hold your head. But that's a form of him creating a legacy. All this stuff is him attempting to cement some level of legacy because he knows once he transitions, people are not really going to think about it. I mean, he'll be always the 45th and 47th president, but he's going to go down like Nixon as one of the worst presidents of all time. But we're not here to talk about him or focus upon him. We're here to talk about our own respective legacies and to recognize the power that we have within that. So legacy is planned continuity. So that means your legacy always starts and begins today. And then those choices that you continue to evolve within, because it's not just a one-time conversation. Any thoughts before we move on to the next slide? Next slide. No hands being raised, because I know Ms. Johnson will let me know if there's any hands being raised. So we don't, make sure we don't leave anyone out. The estate planning process. Okay, I'm going to ask Dr. Cheryl, can you read that paragraph for us, please? Going once.
Wait,
Going
I
twice.
lost it. Hold on. I lost you. Can't find you. You gotta go to somebody else. I lost it.
How'd you lose it?
I don't know.
Okay. Miss Johnson, can you read the paragraph for us, please?
Sure. The
Okay,
estate
Nicole.
planning process. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Cheryl, would you like to proceed?
No, I still can't find it.
Not a problem. Estate planning is the comprehensive framework that governs how your wealth is preserved during your lifetime, managed if you become unable to act, and distributed after your passing. A well-constructed estate plan accounts for every category of assets and obligation you have.
Now, when you start to really think about this, that well-constructed estate plan accounts for every category of asset and obligation you hold. It is so readily important that the estate planning process is something that you have to continuously go through. It is something that is an ever-evolving cycle. It's not something that you just visit one day and that's the end of it. That it doesn't work that way. And the reason why it doesn't work that way because you're starting to recognize how certain things are impacted based upon your decision making. So with anything in life, proper planning means that you're going to end up with a greater result. And if you have the greater result that works for you, not only are you establishing a possibility, but you're actually establishing how your estate planning process will work. So what the process covers: preservation of assets during your lifetime, the making the choices of the management and protections, maybe if you become incapacitated, if that might just happen, and an orderly, tax efficient distribution after death. That's what the process is supposed to be doing. And the assets that are addressed, once again, are your real estate, your investments, those life insurance policies, if you have any business interests, pensions, even collectibles. And of course, unfortunately, those outstanding debts and financial obligations. And the reason why that's so important, because as we stated earlier, you don't want to leave debts for people. So is there anything that's coming up for anyone in regards to what the process does for you or the assets that you may necessarily have? Because sometimes we can be in a space where let's open it up for a dialogue because, when you establish who can make those decisions, if you cannot, that starts to lead into so many other different tributaries. So any thoughts by anyone?
Yes, Dr.
Yes.
Clarke. Okay, go
Good.
ahead, please.
We'll go to Dr. Cheryl, then we'll go to
Yeah.
Mr. Sampson.
First, thank you for having this conversation. I'm so glad that Brother Sampson is here to support us in this conversation because he is the GOAT in this, along with Dr. Clarke doing this together. So this is amazing for our community because these conversations, we think that because Mama only just had a house in the Bronx, that it doesn't mean anything. It means a lot because when you understand estate, it's not a this swirling home. It's what you can basically work for your entire life to begin to, if it's properly stated. I heard something the other day, Dr. Clark, and thank you for this information, that if a will is different than a trust, and you can be in probate in the law, and I may be going too far, you may be going into this, but we're talking about if you have a will, that will, you can be in probate, and the state, depending on the state, they can go back and forth with you with that will. But if it's a trust and the estate is clearly stated in there, what goes where, it is protected, and there is nothing they can do. So thank you for this conversation, Dr. Clark. Thank you for the framework, the understanding how to build wealth with estate planning, and just plan with your family, because it's necessary to have these conversations before going on. And I'm complete.
Thank you for that. Mr. Sampson, the floor is yours.
Yes, Dr. Clarke. I didn't want to get ahead of myself. We will, or should I phrase the question, will we be discussing making the decision of whom is going to manage the trust? And because that's the sensitive issue for me personally. And can we trust companies that position themselves to be the management? And I'm complete. So I know you may future ask those questions. I just wanted to make sure that they would be addressed.
Oh no, that's definitely going to be addressed, because as we were talking about, your lead trustee or the executor, if you're talking about like the executor of a will, that person has a big responsibility. Usually, is probably a trusted lawyer or trusted person of the legal background. And at the same time, when you're talking about like a lead trustee, when we're talking about the trust, that's also important, because now usually you have to be very mindful, because remember, the trust is an entity, and we're going to go into all of that over the course of the next couple of weeks, including tonight, in regards to just recognizing the framework. But you start to understand, as Dr. Cheryl was alluding to, just because you have a will is not a trust, and a trust is not a will. There are two respective different aspects that can work concurrently if you're doing it correctly. And the trust is so important, because you'll start to understand why, as we go over this time frame today and over the next couple of weeks, why the rich make sure that they do a lot of their stuff in trust. Once some of these people start reaching those hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars, they start taking a lot of stuff out of their respective, how should I say, their respective ownership, even though they control it. That's why you have a trust. And you'll see some of the tax efficiencies. That's why we talk about the orderly tax efficient distribution after death. Because and I have to just go back to, Mr. Quincy Jones, and I see your hand, Nicole, you'll be next. And because the way how he had everything structured, it was so seamless that it was just like mind-boggling. It's like, wait a minute, he had all these assets, including real estate and, all the other different things that, he invested over his, his long life. And by the time it touched his kids, state of California couldn't do anything. It was just, everything was just done correctly. And it was great to see that it wasn't hearing people in probate and arguing and, cackling over, resources. It was like, no, everything was just boom, 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 boom. And he had the right individuals. He said everything correctly. He had co-trustees and stuff like that. So, people knew, those who had the right common sense, okay, these are the ones that's going to handle this and handle that, because they showed that while he was alive. And it was just an orderly move. And, we have to start getting like that, especially in our community, because most times they expect Black and brown people just to be haphazardly just doing stuff. And everyone's looking under mattresses for money, or I thought the insurance paperwork was over here and this, that, and the third, and people are just fussing and fighting. Or we're just fussing enough to, have to do a GoFundMe for the funeral, which is crazy. which is craziness. That means that was no planning. And if we don't plan, that means we are positioning ourselves to fail. Yes, Ms. Johnson, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, speaking along the same veins we were just talking about, as far as the estate planning and using the different vehicles, the issue of deed theft has been happening. Well, it's been happening forever, but it's more on the forefront of my mind in New York. So if you were to say, not say, in my will, I leave the house to X, but I leave you as a recipient of the trust that holds the house, you're more likely to keep it from these unscrupulous caretakers and real estate agents who could take your family legacy. And I'm complete.
Oh, that's excellent. That is so powerful. I thank you for you interjecting that into the conversation because, yes, that is happening, especially in New York, especially I would say in our urban communities in New York. People who have had, we even know one of our, we know a church member who experienced that, where she was left like one or two homes. In one of her homes, we were shocked that we saw her one day on social media and it was like, wait a minute, we know that woman. And she was going into there and seeing like how, an unscrupulous developer somehow, finagled the system, and all of a sudden their name was on the deed, and it was like, wait a minute, this house is paid for. Our father left this to us. What? How did their name get on our deed? What is going on? And then they call the marshals or the authorities, and it's like, wait a minute, you can't come in this property. What do you mean I can't come in this property? This is our home. So it's no, this company owns the deed, and this and the third. They're ready to demolish the home. They went in there. She was able to stop it. But she had the paperwork. Thank God there was some level of order to it. But yes, that deed theft is happening all across the country. But it's interesting. It's mainly happening, sort of say, more hypervigilantly in urban communities, which is kind of interesting. That just kind of lets you know that, even racism still kind of rears its ugly head. I know sometimes we desire not to talk about it, but we have to call a spade a spade. You know, there's a big difference of someone going into an affluent community and saying that, oh, somehow, this 5,000 square foot home, someone deed thefted. There's a lower probability that's going to happen. But especially, I would say, in the urban areas where I would say in New York City, where there's a lot of redevelopment that's happening, and some of these developers are just trying to buy people's, one or two family homes so they can tear it down, so they can rebuild like an apartment building on the same land. Because we've seen that, especially in our areas and that in our neighborhood in the Bronx where we own our home. And you can see it. It's like, before that was a parking lot or empty space of land. And all of a sudden you come back a year later and all of a sudden, there's a 20 apartment building in that same space. And it's, skinny and erected, but still it's enough that, someone has redeveloped that little piece of land into something because of the air rights. So, that is great I'm happy you brought that up, Ms. Johnson, because it's true. That has to be an aspect that we have to recognize, and that protects yourself, especially once you have a trust. Okay. Any other thoughts before we move on? Excellent. Eligibility. Who needs estate planning? Interesting, right? Who needs estate plan? Now, let me see if I can go to Dr. Cheryl. Could she read that paragraph now?
Yes, I can.
Jeez.
There is a widespread misconception that estate planning is reserved for the ultra wealthy. In reality, if you have a family that depends on you, assets of any kind, or responsibility that extend beyond yourself, you need a plan. The absence of a plan itself, a, the absence of a plan is itself a decision, and it is really the one you would have chosen.
Thank you for that. And this is where you start to recognize how people say, oh, I was ignorant of that, or I didn't know. It's not an excuse. I'm sorry. That's no longer the excuse. You can sit there, oh my God, I didn't know, I just didn't know. It's like saying that you break the law and stand in front of the officer, or you stand in the court of law. You start saying, well, I didn't know I was breaking the law. That doesn't mean anything. You're still responsible and you had to adhere to the law, regardless if you understood it, learned it, know it, or didn't know it. It's like you going to assault someone and says, why did I get arrested? You assaulted someone. Since you assaulted someone, we arrested you and charged you with assault. Now you have to go through the legal process and now go before a judge who's going to adjudicate the matter. Oh, no, I didn't know that was me breaking the law, but you did. So at times we must recognize, and it happens too many times in our Black, and I have to emphasize that in our Black and brown communities, we start to move in a space where we think that we don't need these respective plans, or we think that these plans are so far and away. And I like how Dr. Cheryl Clarke alluded to the fact that, oh, I only own a home in the Bronx, or I only own a home in this urban area, or this, I live in this urban place, and no, no, that's wealth building. Real estate is one of the aspects that help people to have an appreciable asset that allows you, that you purchase at one level, own it for a bunch of years, and all of a sudden you turn around and it's like, wait a minute, this thing then went up in value double or triple, sometimes 4 times, sometimes 5 times. It's like, oh, over the course of this time frame, as you maintained it and kept it up and things of that nature. So you have an asset, a powerful asset with those who have some sort of ability that even if they desire not to scam you, but they recognize, like they're looking at a gold mine. Says, wait a minute, this person doesn't recognize the equity that's in their home. So we're going to figure out a way to try to, do deed theft or all the other unscrupulous ways of being scammed. Or, sometimes they do that to our senior citizens, and scare them into doing something they shouldn't be doing. And that's part of the plan as well. It's like, yo, who has the power of attorney? Who's helping grandma? Who's helping mom? Don't leave mom to her own devices. Don't leave dad to his own devices. After a certain age, certain things should be pulled out of certain names. But we're going to get into that as we move along. So if you have family, we're talking about your spouses, children, or aging parents who depend on your income, your decisions, or your presence, all need the protection a plan provides. You must have a plan. That's why here at the Comeback Collective Circle, we're about you doing a plan. Not you just doing life. Have a plan. This is the business of living. You're not living just to say, oh, I'm just doing this so I can buy these nice things. No, that's not living. Living is, okay, what are you doing outside of yourself? How are you experiencing giving things that people can say, you know what, we remember these people being here. That's part of your legacy. And that's why it starts in the here and now. If you have assets, it's another reason why you need estate planning. A home, a car, a savings account, a retirement fund. Any asset you own has a destination when you're gone. A plan determines where it goes. Properly plan, position yourself for potential prosperity and success. Improper planning means that you're positioning yourself for failure. And I don't care if you're just an entrepreneur with a business or you're someone who's an employee. Even employees, if you're a homeowner, you should be thinking about a trust or a plan. It's like, no, I'm just a worker. Who said that? You may be an employee, but you still have assets. So don't make an ass out of yourself if you have not planned to make sure you protected your assets. Or if you have responsibility. Talking about business ownership. Your entrepreneurs out there, like including me and Dr. Cheryl, we're business owners. Guardianship. Sometimes you end up having to be responsible for other family members. Or community leadership all require succession plans to ensure continuity beyond your tenure. Like, this is me giving a shout out to Mr. Sampson, his platform, the Legacy Chat, because he's part of the circle, so I have no problem helping to promote his product. But, the Legacy Chat with, Ernest Sampson III, and his platform is great because he's having those conversations with some of the individuals who are in our respective community. And you start to recognize their pathway of how they're building certain things in their respective areas. So that's definitely a YouTube channel you should check out. And the same way that when I see my wife, who, with her platform, Speak Your Power Now, where she does her live each and every Tuesday morning at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you can go to Dr. Cheryl Clarke today as well and check out, her content. You start to recognize they're building these, everything is about planning. Everything is about the movement of thought, because thoughts can become things. See, those ideas that you get allow you to be in a space that if you implement them right and you work them, you'll be working your mind and not your behind. And that is part of your legacy. That is part of your planning. So when you start to think about that, everything that you're doing has some aspect of some possibility when it comes to estate planning, which is part of your legacy. So the truth is, as the statement says on the bottom, if you have something, a family, a home, a dream, a business, you need a plan. Estate plan is not about wealth level. It is about wisdom level. I'll say those last two sentences again. Estate planning is not about wealth level. It is about wisdom level. And sometimes you can see yourself being well positioned to say, were you wise with what you had? Did you recognize that you wasn't supposed to eat every single thing that comes into your hands? That you're supposed to be taking care of your responsibilities, and part of your money is supposed to go back into investments, into things that are producing the possibility of pregnant money? Because if you're not doing that, then as we can see, inflation is high right now. It's only going to get higher. And how you can tell, you can go into your respective grocery store and you can see prices are going up. Fuel surcharges. We're hearing all this stuff with some of the carriers and delivery services and all the other stuff. The other day, Dr. Shaw went into a respective store and she was like, I'm not going in that store. They now charging because if you send it through here and this and the third, and you can recognize that people are making choices. People are making choices. Like, wait a minute, what's going on here? Because we have a conflict that's going on that is squeezing the global economy. Everyone's being affected. And it's going to be some time, even if this thing ended tomorrow, it's going to take time for it to wind itself down because of how everything moves from a macro and microeconomic space. So if you're not planning, you're planning to fail. Any thoughts before we move on about this respective slide? Any thoughts? Okay. The purpose of legacy planning. I'll read the paragraph and then we'll move in and we'll start playing with what's in the boxes. Beyond the legal mechanics, legacy planning serves a profound human purpose, ensuring that the people and causes you love are provided for, protected, and empowered long after you are no longer present to advocate for them. A legacy plan is an act of love made permanent through structure. And when we hear about something like that, you start to recognize how we have a great cultural background. We're culturally rich as those of us of African descent or those of us of descent, because sometimes I hate to say the word African because truly we're not really Africans either. But when you start to recognize that we came from the cradle of where all of life sprung forth from, you start to recognize we've always had structures in play. It was just sometimes the teachings, sometimes the way our certain things may have moved from a colonization standpoint were there to keep you minimizing, just to think that you were subservient. And I'm talking to my Black and brown people. To attempt to keep you subservient or to keep you that, oh, we didn't do this or we didn't do that. It's like, wait a minute. When you really start to break it down, even the Aristotles and the Socrates, they learned from